Okay, good. So the session here is very much notes from the field, what we discovered doing the first infrastructure and IT transformation projects that we are doing with our customers in the last year and a half, 2 years. We kind of, with Paul, we were torn between depth and breadth because we want to show you as much as possible from the different horizontal hybrid integrations. On the other hand, we wanted to show you as much details in there. So kind of, I hope that we stroke as you will see, that we are striking the right balance between giving you a broad overview as well as giving you some good in-depth information. On the other hand, the sessions are only 45 minutes, so there is only so little that you can do in that short time. Let me try to guide you through what we hope that you will get away from this session and what we mostly learned in our endeavors. So if I go on a very high level, when we engage as a consulting group with large enterprises that never really started with cloud computing and they want to actually extend their data center and they're really looking into integration between traditional on-premise IT and then doing stuff over in AWS, we usually go down the very typical path of 4 activities that kind of we see everyone must do. And you will see a big chunk of those 4 that we are melding together into the patterns that you're going to see. The first one is that we definitely need to cater for connectivity, and we set up all of the proper structures on the destination side, which is in our cloud, and how do you connect and all of that. On top of that, we need to help customers to do operational integration. We'll talk a little bit about that. We help customers to actually segment their accounts, which we also see as a mandatory part for every large enterprise, how they slice and dice who can do what. Something that usually you don't do inside the physical data center because you don't need digital permissions to move the server or bring the new one into the rack. The last one we will not cover today, but we always do them as well, is a security envelope, that we try to actually create the whole set of security boundaries and then kind of a validation for security teams that they're actually happy to get the data center core extended into the cloud. What we are going to talk about, it's kind of we will have a session divided into 4 blocks. And both Paul and I were trying to share personal experiences, but also a lot of the stuff that we try to codify into much more generic kind of a bottled knowledge. And this is, if you're looking into AWS professional services, 50% of our mission is actually harvest, package, and then redistribute the knowledge, the best practices that we see that are happening. So I'll start a little bit just to explain when we say hybrid infrastructure, what do we really mean with that? But then we will kick off into specifically how can we connect. We'll show you 3 patterns and go a little bit into depth in there. We'll talk about the enterprise integration and what it actually means to use that connectivity link when you hybridly connect both sides. And then at the end, just a little bit about the common workloads. We had way more workloads listed there, but as we started to go through all of the dry runs and everything, kind of we saw that at the end we can't squeeze more than 2 into it. So it's not that there are only 2. We kind of, from a list of unbelievable long list of workloads that you can put on top of it, we just grabbed a couple of them. Anything else, Mr. Lumberjack?
No.
So, on a very high level, when we talk about hybrid integration, you probably noticed you never really hear that we would ever talk about a hybrid cloud or any of that terminology, particularly because it is extremely overloaded as a term. So when we say hybrid integration or hybrid infrastructure to our clients, literally we are talking about, as you will see here, a lollipop pattern. Lollipop, when we design it, means that you extend your data center out to the cloud, and the only way to that extension is from your data center out, you get your stuff, and the only way is also coming back. So hybrid integration is everything. How do you create that pattern? How do we create a very solid lollipop stick? How do we create a very well-defined sugary part of the lollipop? And how do you actually use it end-to-end that both sides feel that the security envelope is correct, that the risk is minimized, and actually the flow and all of that is running well. So as I said, you will see those 4 layers being covered by us We'll talk a lot about the connectivity and how do you actually make, there are 3 possible options. Well, there are more, but there are 3 most commonly used patterns. How do you securely, safely extend your data center to achieve the lollipop pattern? Then we'll talk about how do you put and extend the authentication and authorization on top of it. We'll look a little bit into the management tools, because once you claim that you extended your data center, you want to use exactly the same type of a management, monitoring, eventing, alerting, and everything that you did in-house, you want to now use also on that infrastructure out there. And then we'll try to add a little bit of that additional stuff. We'll try to bring the storage through S3, which is not exactly part of a typical VPC, but we kind of try to extend all of that in there. And there, kind of initially we wanted to talk a lot about the workload migration and integration, but that is a topic on its own, and a shameless plug before we start with this session, we do have another session specifically on application migration after you do all of this, what you're going to hear today here. What do you actually do in order to first do application assessment and application migration? And you will find that session tomorrow morning somewhere in a catalog in the enterprise track. So Paul, tell us about the connectivity part.
So from a connectivity standpoint, this is going to kind of cover bringing your cloud services and integrating them with your on-premise data center. It's going to turn your cloud infrastructure from a second-class citizen into a first-tier member of your environment. And we're going to kind of dive into just the first slide here and look at it. Our first slide depicts an IPsec VPN here. So from an IPsec standpoint, we're actually using hardware on-site in your current data center and leveraging your internet bandwidth across to establish a connection into our VPC. Our VPC is nothing more than a logical aggregation of RFC 1918 IP space out there. So if anybody is familiar with that, that is non-routable IP space that we actually allow you to carve up inside of our cloud. From the standpoint of instantiating the IPsec tunnel, you actually control the keys from that perspective. So when you enable the IPsec tunnel underneath the hood and establish the IPsec, you terminate it on what we call our virtual gateway. Our virtual gateway product is basically a redundant multi-AZ logical device inside of our data center that acts as the termination point for your IPsec tunnel. So with this, we've actually enabled IPsec from our data center into the cloud from that perspective, and now have connectivity out there. With this connectivity, we have several options now. Now we can start to look at migrating workloads. We can actually start to look at accessing my private backend infrastructure without having to go directly across the internet and proxy in from that perspective. So it's going to be treated no different than any type of infrastructure or network that you have currently in your environment. With IPsec, we can actually enable BGP in here. This is an option from that perspective. One thing to note is if you are going to use BGP, we only accept the private ASN range right now. So that's 64,512 through 65,535 from that perspective. That'll be something key that you want to talk to your network administrator about, because those are the only ranges that are currently accepted with the hardware VPN solution today. It is worth noting that this is all over your own internet access from that perspective. So if you have people like in most organizations that come in and start on Monday and open up YouTube and download the latest videos and stuff like that, you could see performance impact across your IPsec tunnel. So if you're looking for a dedicated solution from that perspective, we would be looking at our next discussion for connectivity.
Just one remark here. We always do everything to be redundant, as you probably noticed, and then we also ask customers for make your systems resilient. When we say VPN and a channel, an IPsec channel, you always get 2. Please do use 2, because they are made in a way that will allow you the resiliency patterns in case something goes wrong. You don't want to have a single usage. You get 2 channels, you use one, and in case of availability zone goes down, and that one channel goes down, you are the one that is in fault that didn't use the other channel, right?
From a direct connect standpoint, we have a very similar configuration. There is a little bit of a difference here. We have a direct connect location intermediary in there. And what that is that's where we've extended out our AWS, basically our direct connect functionality into a partner location. So how this actually works is you would basically use your router and then drop another router into that co-location, if you want to put it that way, where AWS Direct Connect exists. And then you can establish connectivity on the back end. A few things to note from this design is Direct Connect out of the box is active-active. You can make it an active-passive design. Everything is in pairs of 2 from that perspective. But if you so choose to, you can actually do active-passive on it. This solution does require BGP from that perspective as well. So in our previous discussion with IPsec, it was an option. In this solution, you are required to use BGP, and you're also required to use 802.1q VLAN trunking from that perspective. So with this solution, we also have another option. We've got access to our VPC out there, but we can also get access to public API resources that are available on the perimeter. So how that's done is we basically just serve up another tunnel across our Direct Connect, tag it with a VLAN. It's got a BGP association with it as well, and we just see it as another internal IP space that we can actually route and map traffic across. The Direct Connect also has a few other features and functionalities that the IPsec tunnel does not have. You can map it across multiple accounts from that perspective. So if I have 10 or 15 AWS accounts out there and I want to leverage them across that with Direct Connect, I can feasibly use all of those accounts across my Direct Connect. It's not just one and done from that perspective. Direct Connect comes in at both gigabit and 10 gig speeds, and it can go down to as low as 50 megabytes from that perspective, but that's going to be a partnered offer solution. So there are variables of speed underneath that which are less than a gig, but those are all APN partner driven from that perspective. And you're going to be sharing a line from that perspective on that if you do go with less than a gig. Once you do go with gig or 10 gig, it is fully dedicated pipe from that perspective. Is your bandwidth to use as you need. A nice feature of that is, since it is a dedicated line, the internet traffic is not being charged to you from that perspective, so we see a price reduction here. In our previous IPsec tunnel, it was 12 cents a gig for internet-facing bandwidth coming outside of AWS. With Direct Connect, that is as low as 2 cents per gig, depending on the region.
So the greatest advantage of this solution for enterprises is that you completely avoided the internet, right? You bypass the internet 100%. This is all kind of a non-internet connectivity. It goes over our peering partner, and everything looks wonderful unless you hit your security team and they're going, well, there is actually no assurance of site snooping or anything. We can assure everything you see on our orange path all the way to our own routers. We can't guarantee what's happening. I mean, we do our best with our partners, but when it comes to validation and compliance assurance, usually security comes back to us and says, you know what, that VPN solution with encryption on a tunnel was actually better for our workloads because it provides all security compliance and all of that stuff. The problem is that Direct Connect has a much better throughput and has much better assured, guaranteed no jitter line because it doesn't go over internet. So why don't we do both? Why don't you put a channel over a Direct Connect?
Yeah, so in this solution, we actually have now a hybrid on top of it. So we have IPsec routing directly over our Direct Connect. So we're not actually using internet-based IP address ranges from that perspective. We're not directly routing it across the internet. We're routing it across our back-end known direct infrastructure. Another nice advantage of this is instead of it being 12 cents a gig to do IPsec tunneling across, we're down in that 2 cents per gig range now. So we've actually enabled an IPsec tunnel to run across our infrastructure and have reduced the cost, but also added that encryption layer from that perspective. Another thing that should be noted, that you can also run these in tandem. So if you want to have a Direct Connect as your primary and an IPsec tunnel as your backup, that's fully supported by us from that perspective. So if you're worried about that reliability and that resiliency of either of the connections from that perspective, that's something that you can definitely set up as an active-passive type backup and failure thing. So let's jump into enterprise integration here. We've kind of laid the foundation for our connectivity. Now we can actually look to see what we can leverage from that perspective out of our enterprise infrastructure. And looking at that, the first thing that we're going to actually want to look about and talk about is Active Directory here. So authentication from that perspective. You know, my applications now are becoming more reliant on authentication mechanisms. They're becoming, you know, more resilient, more redundant, but I need to be able to get in them in a safe and secure manner. So we can actually look at moving out our Active Directory infrastructure in this model here. What we're actually depicting up here is we've actually built out some EC2 domain controllers inside of Amazon from that perspective to actually move that authentication mechanism further and closer to our backend resources. So this is going to reduce our latency for authentication. It's also going to reduce the amount of traffic that has to come back along our pipes and reduce the amount of cost that we're going to pay for that. The nice thing is you can actually extend all the FSMA roles out there. There's nothing that's any different than an Active Directory domain controller in any particular remote site out there. So we can have the multi-master read-write functionality of domain controllers. We can also have read-only domain controllers out there from that perspective. And we're just leveraging our investment in either the IPsec tunnel or the Direct Connect solution that we're using on the back end. So we can definitely see some of those types of things as being feasible and possible now with our infrastructure, and just leverage our own investment that we currently have into AD, whether that be multiple data domains or just maybe even possibly a root domain from that perspective.
Good. So here is one issue when you put the Active Directory out into the cloud, because very much Active Directory kind of decides, is it a WAN link or a LAN link? And we want to treat, because we want to see that hybrid connectivity, we want to see this as a true extension, so it's a LAN. Well, Active Directory was made in a times when LAN meant that very much I'm in the same security zone and I can spray and talk anyway and as much as I want to do. That's why you can see that very much, you don't even need a firewall in between. Look at the ports that you need to open, because the solution was made in a times when, you know, you need to open kind of the whole IP range. That's how it was designed, and that's the times where that legacy solution is coming from. You want to treat it as a LAN solution, you will need to work together with your security team to actually properly, I wouldn't call it a pinhole, it's kind of a much more a bulldozer opening on the security rules, but at least you need to connect Active Directory to Active Directory. It allows you to get that hybrid illusion because you get a full-blown Active Directory in there. It's not the best. It's not the most optimal solution. The better one, Paul is going to show you on the next pattern.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to kind of iterate on top of that, when you do create your security groups around that, you probably want to share the same security group with each one of your Active Directory domain controllers, just due to the amount of ports that we have out there that we're going to be opening up for our security group. There's a white paper that's listed on this slide from that perspective that kind of talks through some of those challenges on the back end that you want to be aware of with that.
Yeah, by the way, before somebody complains, in that list of ports that you need to have open, these are not just AD ports. You also need to have a DNS connectivity open, DHCP open. And you go on MSDN and you grab the list of the ports that they expect that Active Directory has open, and it's a substantial list.
So what we've kind of done here is we've actually shown our new AWS Directory Services from that perspective. So Directory Services comes in two modes. It comes in a simple AD mode, which is basically a Samba 4 Active Directory server that's deployed out there, and then it comes in Directory Services Connect, which you see here from that perspective. The Directory Services Connect is basically depicting what we would consider a federation model from that perspective. So the nice thing about this is it's a managed service. You can go out there and deploy this in a matter of minutes. It doesn't take hours of expertise to deploy these solutions. It's fairly straightforward. It's a couple of clicks of a mouse and you're up and running. We've actually taken some of the sizing aspects of it out of you, and it actually deploys in two modes: a smaller version, which is up to 10,000 users, and then a larger version, which is up to 100,000 objects from that perspective. So we can kind of see here now that we've alleviated some of our back-end challenging work. We don't have to actually worry about the security groups that we have to create. It actually ties all of that in. We actually don't have to worry about building out all of my federated services on the back end from that perspective. So I wouldn't have to worry about, you know, lighting up additional infrastructure for ADFS. I wouldn't have to worry about, you know, lighting up a web server for a URL that I can go out there and use from that perspective on like our Zocalo service or our management console from that perspective. So this is going to give us a lot more functionality and be a lot easier to configure out of the box. Looking at the simple AD, you may choose to deploy that as well in your environment and still have your AD domain out there. We see a lot of customers that like that option for building out test dev environments or applications that they basically only need a small footprint, that it doesn't really make sense to invest the effort of migrating your traditional Active Directory environments out there. So that's where we see a lot of new use cases and a lot of new unique ways of using these services coming online in the back end. And it's actually reducing the amount of time that administrators are actually trying to build infrastructures out there to support their applications in a meaningful way. One very nice feature is this service has a snapshot ability on the back end. So we can actually use that for rolling back at points of time. We're managing all of those backups and all of the functionality with the snapshot. So it's very similar to the snapshots of an EBS volume underneath the hood, but built in directly for this service as well.
Good. So let's talk now after we have Authentication Engine. And that Authentication Engine is usually used primarily for the OS layer and kind of the typical functions that authentication authorization was used in a traditional environment. As you probably know, AWS also has a complete authentication authorization schema for actually doing something with the virtual services itself. So we need to look into how do we set up accounts on that layer? Who can actually create, who can watch, who can delete, who can pause and stop and all of that for the instances. Also, it goes into here, what type of a services can who run and so on and so on. So that is actually a very, very substantial exercise that you should not underestimate. And you are going, well, we already have all of the nice groups done in Active Directory or whichever authentication engine you use. You still need to go through a very large exercise, which kind of we see it, it's almost like first you slice them, in this case, vertically, which you go, well, what is my life cycle, how we do things? So what does the security team need to see? And usually you need to create a special type of account group that the role that they see everything across, they're able to go straight into the CloudWatch, which we'll talk in the Cloud Trail, we'll talk a little bit about it later. But the whole idea is that you need to have roles defined for every specific activity in your organization and find the matching set of authorizations for them. And kind of the desire is that your governance life cycle is complete. People that do things, people that control things, people that oversee, and people that have ability to actually pull the plug, correct, stop, actually kill the connection in case you see that there is some security breach. All of that needs to be logged, all of that needs to be properly documented. This is not a small exercise. The worst thing that you can do here is that actually start sharing accounts on its own, because when it comes to the last part of the accountability and non-repudiation, you need to give individual account to individual people to do stuff on AWS in that extended hybrid environment. You don't share accounts within Active Directory, you shouldn't share accounts within AWS either. Treat it exactly in the same manner, in exactly in the same way. And then even within the same silo, let's say that you have a software developers, you can stratify the software developers as well. You can have a different type of developers that have access to different type of resources with a different type of rights. So you already can see through words that I'm using, this actually creates a very complex mesh of accountabilities and who can do what that you need to properly document and track. There is simply not some easy solution just to dump everybody into some tree of hierarchy. Also, the other part is once we have all of that, so we covered connectivity, we covered authentication across, and now we need to actually cover as well the basic requirement that we get to the proper security, identity, and event management, and all of the other things that are prerequisite for every operations team. Time and time again, Paul and I, we go to large engagements where operations team at the end says, everything looks nice, but we are not going to use cloud because we don't know what those systems are doing over there. Well, they should know. So the easiest way to come to that target is to actually assume that the same solutions that are used in-house, and you can see here on the left side of the slide, so you have a monitoring console and you have a various bunch of servers, either you have the aggregator service or reporting service, and also we'll talk about the updating and patching service. All of these infrastructure for operations monitoring and management has to extend all the way to that lollipop, to that other side. Which means that on other side, we need to provide first all of the agents and all of the things within the running images, within AMIs. But we have over and above abilities as well. So two key services that every enterprise needs to look into it in their hybrid story. One of them is CloudTrail and the other one is CloudWatch. CloudWatch is the one that provides all of the matrix and measurement of everything that is kind of below the operating system down towards the hypervisor and lower. How does network perform? How does CPU load perform? How does the disk load on the hardware layer, virtual hardware layer, perform? We also allow and actually enable our partner ecosystem to build the plugins that Amazon CloudWatch is able to look into the operating system itself, look into the applications itself. But one thing that we note is that we need to teach every customer, and that's why we are expressing it here. By default, the CloudWatch cannot see into your instance. It will stop on the hypervisor layer and will tell you everything how that virtual hardware for your instance performs, but not above it by default. The other one is the CloudTrail. CloudTrail, think about it like a big sink of every single event, every single API call, everything that happened. Actually, it is a nirvana for IT auditors and security compliance auditors and officers, because CloudTrail has that ability of a non-repudiation and complete logging and auditing and trailing of everything that's in there. Information in CloudTrail is ultra granular. If you just go to your auditor and you go, yeah, sure, everything is in this humongous data warehouse, they will get lost, because very much amount of information in there makes no sense to a normal human being. So you need to actually put some type of aggregating reporting solution on top of it, or even better, link all of those events and link all of those monitors actually coming from CloudWatch straight back to your CM aggregator that you already have in-house. Every large enterprise already has a security, identity, and event monitoring solution in-house, and it's just a matter of plugging all of them together. The last part you need to think about is, if this is a lollipop, that means that the only way is through your link into the virtual private cloud, and then the only way coming out is back to your data center. If you run something in the lollipop, how does it get updates? Well, it gets them from your own environment. So either you have your own patching service and update service running in the data centers. They need to become aware of every single instance that can get patches out in the VPC. Or if you are allowing straight internet updates, here comes the trick. You need to allow that the machine running in VPC goes through that dedicated link we talked about to your environment and exit internet through your own link, whichever you have, get the updates out there and come back. So it's almost like counterintuitive to think, well, isn't that a cloud environment? It sits on the internet. Yes, but we insulated it so well and so completely with walls, there is no way to jump over that wall while you are in VPC. The only way is come back to your environment and you serve that request.
Yeah, so one thing that should be noted here on this diagram is we've been talking about hybrid integration. This diagram depicts all of your services running in your localized data center or data centers. From that perspective, with a hybrid integration, you can actually move those services up to the cloud. So if you want to run your aggregators in the cloud, if you want to run your update servers in the cloud or have that extended out there, that's completely feasible from that perspective. We've just depicted it in this diagram as kind of everything is on premise and made that assumption here today, building it out from where we came from at the beginning. But look at all those other services that are out there in the marketplace or even that you have in-house and think about moving them into the cloud. It may make a lot of sense just based on latency and long hauling that traffic back across those connections. Treat that connection as a pretty valuable thing in the infrastructure. So now we're going to kind of look at a few of the common hybrid workloads out here. We've chosen two of them today to kind of walk through and talk a little bit about. There are quite a few more. As we just talked about on the last slide, you can actually see some options in there that could be hybrid integrated infrastructure workloads as well. So looking at the first one, we have a backup and archiving solution here. And what we're actually depicting is twofold. We have an existing backup system or solution on site that is basically now starting to integrate with our S3 product from that perspective on the back end. So now we have leveraged our current existing infrastructure to basically push backups into S3 and start moving away from that physical media into that virtual type volumes. But some of the nice things about using that is maybe you already have deduplication occurring with your software. Maybe you already have some type of compression with your software. All of that's going to translate into that media that's being pushed up into S3. And the nice thing about pushing everything up into S3 is now I can actually set an archive policy on it. So I can say, okay, I have particular media for XYZ server in my bucket. I can actually set a policy on it now to archive off into Glacier. So maybe in S3 I'm paying 3.8 cents per gig a month. In Glacier I'm going to be paying a penny a gig. And that's where you can actually start to see how this truly becomes revolutionary on saving you a lot of costs on your backup and archiving solutions. But we also have another option too, and that would be a storage gateway type device. In here we're just depicting the AWS storage gateway serving up an iSCSI volume and acting as the virtual tape library for us. Same process once again, it's integrating with S3, it's managing our policies on the buckets, and it's able to basically push that back into Glacier on the back end from that perspective. We can also use our storage gateway device to act as the point of retrieval as well. So if I've put something into archive and I need to go back and access it from that perspective, I can do that directly from the storage gateway device. And all of those volumes are served up as an iSCSI volume for us, so it's very easy to mount and attach this to our backup servers out there. We can also mount this onto servers that are already using your existing backup services. So partners like Symantec and Veeam have recently integrated with our storage gateway device. So from that perspective, we see enhancements around that. We also see other solutions like NetApp out there providing up other VTL services. But I would definitely check your backup and archiving tool and see if it can actually integrate. The list is quite extensive now, and we've seen a lot of embracement of this over the last few months. And then kind of another option is storage expansion. So in this scenario, once again, you see our storage gateway device, but we also look at another storage appliance from that perspective. So looking at the storage appliance, this is going to be one of our marketplace partners from that perspective that are going to provide up an appliance out there. And that appliance is basically going to provide up cache volumes to your local servers from that perspective to write to or mount to. And you're able to mount, common protocol type volumes out there, iSCSI, NFS, CIFS. So really not a whole lot of integration with, building out RAID sets, LUNs and all of that stuff that is very complex from a storage solution on the back end. Server administrators are, being empowered to, consume the storage now instead of having to, get out there and contact your storage team and talk to them about, hey, I need 5 terabytes of storage. Okay, that's going to be 6 months worth of time, and I need $500,000 from that perspective. These are going to rapidly enable you to integrate with our Amazon S3 service, and on the back end, basically drain that data off. So the front end, we see our storage cache volumes for both read and write, and then as that data is accessed, it's basically run across either the internet from that perspective or across your investment in an IPsec or direct connect tunnel and dumps that data directly into S3 on the back end. With our AWS storage gateway device, we do the same thing as well with both cache, read and write volumes. It's a little bit more limited in scope. It actually only serves up iSCSI volumes. So from that perspective, if you want to mount the iSCSI volume and then format it in the particular protocol that you're running out there, that's fully approved. Right now we have listed out some of our AWS market partners in this segment, but this is just a small selection of what we actually see out there in the broader ecosystem.
So that marketplace actually becomes extremely appealing option once you have that hybrid connectivity set up that we laid out for you. The core reason is that it so simplifies the purchasing of enterprise solutions. You now have your own dedicated extension of your virtual data center very much. You go to the marketplace and it's literally with one click that you can get any type of the enterprise solution offered in there. So it will be spun up straight in your VPC. It will get all of the characteristics and expectations of your VPC and your link and everything that you created. Yet the whole payment and billing and licensing and all of that is kind of so trivialized, not just simplified, but trivialized, that we see huge amount of our enterprises actually go through that catalog and it's almost like a gold mine. Oh, we would like to try this. Look, it's a try before you buy. Oh, here we can bring our own license for the software that we already use in-house, and we don't even need to go through the whole complete stack of installation and operational procedures and everything. And suddenly everything from SAP that is there by single click, and we saw that on the type of the hybrid infrastructure that we presented to you, you can get a dev, test, QAing environment for SAP very much spun up in fraction of the time that traditionally requires. So marketplace here becomes one of the very interesting enablers on the hybrid infrastructure, that you can actually use the Amazon placement and marketplace with all of the integration and packaged solutions in there to actually get the things for your enterprise that you could never really afford, not so much from cost perspective, but from the effort perspective of, or going through all of the hoops and all of the workflow required for a traditional purchasing, for traditional installation, and thinking about whom else needs to be involved in that. So one of the major enablers in that hybrid scenario would be go through the marketplace, find what's in there, because it is first super low cost. Most of them are try before you buy. You can actually not even pay anything, and you can spin them up in your VPCs if you want, in a dedicated VPC or in a one master VPC that you have, or whatever infrastructure was made over there.
Yeah, and just to kind of add on to that, leverage the investments that you've already made. So if you have investments out there, check to see if they're in the marketplace. It's a good bet that we have a large selection of the current vendors that are out there, and new vendors coming online every day that are doing the things that you want to do in this type of hybrid integration.
So when we say hybrid, again, in this session, just to make sure that we have the same terminology here, we're talking about the environment when you don't truly see from the operational perspective and from workload, IT workload capability, where actually it runs. Does it run here or there? So that hybrid integration, in order to achieve it, first, connectivity, connectivity, connectivity. We saw it again and again and again, that first organizations start something isolated and separate, and then later they realize that, ooh, actually, let's go back to the square one. Connection needs to be set right, security needs to agree and approve on it, we need to get a correct security envelope on connectivity. So integration, whatever else you put on top of it, and it doesn't even matter what type of the technology you run on top of it, the correct pattern to connect your data center and do the hybrid integration over to the cloud is really relying on those various options that we are offering through connectivity patterns. After you have that, you still need to extend your in-house authorization authentication engine out. Because whatever you will run out there still needs to verify who are you, what do you want from me, which server is calling me, why is it calling me, where do I go to check if the token is valid, is Kerberos traffic flowing through it, is ticket granting ticket service flowing. It all depends how your systems are designed. Are they very old or new or whatever they are? You need to have authentication authorization flow established before you do anything else out there. And then on top of that, once you have an operational monitoring, I didn't mention on this slide, but definitely operational monitoring is the one on top that you need to know when you put something out there, is it healthy? Does it run? What's happening in there? Is it secure? And all of that. And the last part then is actually the world is your oyster. You go through any type of the workloads that you know that you can or would or should run, and all of those fears of tightly integrated meshed systems that are usually feared that, oh, you need to move everything at once. No, as long as your connectivity and security envelope is defined correctly and your operational integration works, you don't need to move all of the humongous set, the whole flotilla of systems for one business workload over at the same time. Any other remarks from you?
Nope.
Okay, so I will open up for questions, but before we do that, as you probably heard, we do ask for feedback. So if you did like the session, this is the Enterprise 401 session, Paul and Miha. If you didn't like the session, I need to be frank and earnest with you here, right? He will be frank, I'll be earnest, and this is the Gaming Track 372 session. Please feel that servant, right? Question over there, please. Good question. I don't think we have an answer off the spot. Let's take that offline. We'll do our best to give you the answer. Okay. Fair enough. The second one?
Authentication with AD. Is there a way you support for MFA with AD?
Multifunction authentication?
Yeah, so MFA is supported in the connector solution. So the AWS Directory Services Connect actually supports MFA tokens from that perspective. Yep, absolutely. The Connect solution is actually acting as a federation solution from that perspective. So yes, you're going to have an MFA option in there.
That's a very good question about the multi-factor authentication, yes.
Is it supported with just SAML federation services if I just have what's it on premise?
So you would use AD from that perspective. AD would be the tie-in.
Yeah, SAML has just a subset of API what AD expects. So you do need to go with a legacy, with a native AD solution. Yes, sir.
For the customers who are building those architectures, how are they getting API access, S3 access? Is it over their on-prem network, or do you find that they're also deploying IPW? What are you seeing for AWS?
Yeah, so...
repeat the question.
Okay, so it was basically how are we seeing customers access public APIs from their on-premise environment. We kind of see that both ways. We both see them using still internet-based communication directly to the APIs, but we also see them a lot of times once they've enabled a direct connect, setting up that private communication with the API subset behind the scenes. So that's kind of the second path that you can get with the direct connect, one being to your VPC and the other being to the internet-facing API subset of all of our services as well. So you can enable that VLAN tag with private networking set up on the back end with a direct connect.
It all depends what you require. If you have a very flexible workforce that actually wants to work also from outside your network, usually going over internet is way more flexible than demanding using just direct connect. But you can enforce either.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to come down to, some of our environments when we're talking about enterprise customers, they have, many sites. They may have the direct connect set up from their corporate data center from that perspective. It may make more sense for them instead of routing all the way back through your home facilities and up to the cloud to just go directly to the cloud from that perspective. No, from that perspective,
at least one VPC would always be isolated, at least one. How about I turn it around? At least one VPC usually has internet gateway, and there will be more VPCs on the back that are true lollipop isolated VPCs. That would be most common.
Yeah, it's going to come down to, I mean, if you're going to try and serve a web application up from your infrastructure out there, you probably wouldn't want to have the web app in the private tier, right? Because then it's going to have to traverse all the way back down your pipe and then go out your public-facing internet in your facility, right? So you're probably going to have both public and private in some of your VPCs and secure those applicably from that perspective with security groups and then just on your route tables with the IGW on the back end.
I saw a couple more hands, but they will kick us out from the room. Paul and I are staying around either here or outside the room. Please come with the rest of the questions to us, but we have to vacate the facility for the next speaker. Thank you so much. Don't forget to fill the evaluation only if you liked the session.